Good morning, everyone. Pastor Frank at Shield of Faith in Pflugerville, Texas. This morning on our little devotion Bible study, we're going to be talking about Elijah. We'll get started right after this. So, this morning we'll be talking about Elijah. Our scripture that we'll read this morning is going to be found in uh, James chapter 5. And I'll just read couple of scriptures here, a couple of verses. And just as always, if you get online with us, type something in, let us know you're there. Uh, Say hi. If you have a comment, please feel free to make the comment. If you have a question, feel free to ask that. When we see it, we'll uh, do our best to answer it. Um, so, James chapter 5, 17 through 18. I like the way the New Living Testament uh, translates this because this is an important part of what I want to try to get across to you this morning is uh, is that Elijah. Well, let me just read the scripture. James chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. Elijah was as human as we are. And yet, when he prayed earnestly that no rain would fall, none fell for 3.5 years. Then, when he prayed again, the sky sent down rain, and the earth began to yield its crops. So, uh, several instances in the Bible tell of someone praying for the dead to be raised and see them restored to life. Uh, Elijah is one of those who raised the dead through the power of God. And Elijah is a good example of a praying man. Uh, and what's important for everybody to get a hold of us when we see things like that and hear of stories like that, we think, well, that's them. That was then. It happens then. But James makes a point uh, a long time later. James makes a point for people to understand that Elijah was a man just like everybody else. And Elijah had weaknesses. I forgot to tell you to get your coffee. I have to have mine with me in the morning. So Elijah had weaknesses. Uh, for some reason, Elijah was uh, not able to reflect on his victories and offset his fears. He had a lot of fears, and probably Elijah wasn't as careful as he should be about caring for his physical needs, and he often fell into discouragement and at times depression. So even though those things are uh, difficult to understand, I know I've been asked many times as a pastor, how can a Christian become depressed? And to be honest with you, I really don't have a good answer for that question. I could give you an answer. I could say you needed more faith, or I could say you needed to pray more, or I say you needed to do. But the fact of the matter is I don't have a good answer for that. Uh, in fact, many people who have done great things uh, many times get discouraged, and some even become depressed. But uh, Elijah uh, was he wasn't infallible. Every decision he made was not, exactly what it could have been. And but the thing to remember about Elijah is not so much that he got discouraged sometimes, or that or he got depressed, but the fact is that Elijah uh, used his strengths to offset his weaknesses. Uh, and one thing that a lot of people need to realize is, if you have weaknesses, you also have strengths, and we need to learn to use our strengths to offset our weaknesses. And I just want to say this and see if I can get it. See if I can get it right. Um, a lot of times, people tell us that we ought to keep working on our weaknesses until we make them a strength. But it's really better to continue to make our strengths better so they further offset our weaknesses. Uh, you can expend a large amount of resources trying to make your weaknesses better, but the fact is that your strengths will override your weaknesses. They won't allow your weaknesses to come to the surface if you keep your strengths up. So uh, it's kind of like uh, uh, it's really like you can take someone who commits a crime and spend many years and very much resources trying to reform them or restore them, uh, and have some level of success at that. Or you can spend uh, some less resources on younger children and help where they don't ever start a life of crime. So if it was just a matter of resources, it's one thing, but it's not just that. It's actually uh, learning how uh, to let your strengths uh, overshadow your weaknesses is something that I think we all should do as men and women of faith. But Elijah gives us some lessons on prayer, and one of the things that Elijah was a mighty man of prayer. Uh, we talk about the miracles Elijah did, but Elijah was a mighty man of prayer. And each one of us must face self-doubts. Uh, there's a whole lot of prayer that no one really understands. I've been asked so many questions about prayer, why one prayer worked and another didn't. And I have to be honest with you, there's so many times that I've asked myself that same question: why do things sometimes work and sometimes don't? And I've heard so many answers but the fact of the matter is one of the things that we need to realize uh, is we don't have all the answers. And they write books about prayer, and they write books about faith. And the thing that really happens here, and that I want to get across this morning, is to have a real prayer life. It has to be on purpose, and it has to be consistent. Uh, and it requires what I don't know. I think sometimes challenges some of us. I know it challenges me. It requires having self-discipline. Uh, we can always find time to pray if we want to pray. If we have a consistent prayer life, then we're going to have a relationship with God similar to what Elijah did, in the fact that God spoke to Elijah, and Elijah knew what to do. He knew where to go. And there's a lot of miracles that were done through Elijah's prayer time. But there's a lot of things that happened. He was able to control the weather. Sometimes he performed miracles like restoring a child to life, multiplying the oil and the meal, and calling down fire on people, uh, dividing the waters of the Jordan. I mean, he's definitely a powerful man of God, and his power came from his connection with God. And our power comes by our connection with God. But we have to remember there's a little bit of a difference. We don't have to go that far to be connected with God because God lives within us. And if we understand that God lives within us, then our prayers are answered instantaneously. Our prayers are heard instantaneously. Everything happens right there. It happens right in because God lives in each one of us. So, uh, to be honest with you, it's a lot easier to read a book about prayer and to talk about prayer than it is just to get to prayer. And I think we need to continue to uh, encourage one another in prayer, challenge one another to pray. If there was ever a time in our country that there needed to be great women, men and women of God, uh, in praying, now is the time. We really need to see a revival in this country. And there used to be a term I heard in the church many times was prayer warriors. I haven't heard it in quite some years as much. I've heard the term intercessor, and I don't mean I read it in a book. I mean there were people in the church that were prayer intercessors, and there were people in the church that were prayer warriors. And when things happen, people began to go to prayer. Uh, and when we find that place in prayer where we can continue to do battle with the evil one and to intercede for others in our prayers. And I think we need to intercede for our country in prayer. And I think we should be willing to believe God to bring revival to this country. And I think if you bring revival to this country, a revival will spread around the world. Um, and we should have a prayer program or prayer schedule. I know a lot of people have a Bible reading program, and I I have one friend that he has a Bible reading program, but he's always ahead of his Bible reading program. So instead of reading the Bible through once in a year, he might read it through a couple of times. So he exceeds it by. I mean, we should be that same way about prayer. We should have a prayer, and then we should exceed that prayer plan that we have. And I'm inclined to, and I'll be honest with you, I've been resistant to having lists for prayer. But in this day and age, I think my mind, I think we probably ought to have written down a list of what we're praying for. I know Sister Gail does. She's got a list of stuff, and then when we have prayer meetings, she's one of the ones, the resources that can bring back to memory those people that we need to be praying for. So to be mighty in prayer doesn't take as much as I think a lot of people do. I think as a lot of people think it does, and I think it's looking at people like Elijah and others that are Bible characters and thinking that they were special people. The difference in them and us is there's no difference. They're normal people, just like we are. But what happens is they apply their spiritual knowledge, and they apply their spiritual weapons, and they apply their spiritual gifts. And that's what we need to learn how to do, is understand that we don't have to be the leader of a church of 10,000. We don't have to be we can sit on the back row of a church of 10 and and see God do as much as anybody else anywhere else. The thing is if we begin to make that connection with God, and when you make that connection with God, sure, like Elijah did, then you're going to see things begin to happen as you pray. Uh, I know that uh, times before, I had a group of people uh, in the church that many times would intercede for me in the ministry. And I've seen times when they would begin to come down to the front row of the church and kneel on the front chairs there and just begin to pray for the service and pray for God to move. And I've seen great things happen then. So I think prayer warrior, prayer intercessor, I think those are terms we need to hear again very often. And not only just a term, but it needs to be something that we become. Warriors in prayer, intercessors for those that have needs, and then see. Uh, so, to kind of wind this up this morning, prayer is the most vital link you have with God. It is, uh, prayer is the most vital link you have to learning to hear God's voice, to creating your relationship with God. So he's not surprised when you want to talk to him, and you're not surprised when he answers you. And uh, every child of God should use that opportunity to give glory and honor to God. Uh, and then watch God help you develop as not only as a prayer warrior or an intercessor, but a great person of God. I mean, uh, Elijah was I mean, you couldn't stop him when he had a heart for people. He did not like ungodly leaders. He would stand up. I mean, I make it sound like he was weak somehow, but that's not the case at all. And I want you to understand this morning, people that face uh, discouragement or even depression aren't weak people. They facing circumstances at that time that they need God's help to get through. So and sometimes our help. So we need to be praying uh, over the next months for our nation. And I like that Brother James says you can't have a relationship with someone without talking to them, and that's true. So uh, you really need to be aware that if you want to have a relationship with God, you need to talk to him. Don't be afraid to talk to God. And so this morning, just remember, Elijah was a person just like us, just a human. He was human, and it's not that he had something we didn't. It's the fact that he spent time and he created that relationship with God that caused God to be able to use him to do great things. Yes, he did get discouraged. Yes, he did get depressed, but he got up and he continued to do what God had asked him to do. God continued to energize him. So this morning, I think that's what we need to ask God, to energize us as Christians in this nation. And I pray that God would touch your heart and minister to you and just lift you up this morning. And as you find yourself in prayer, I pray that God would speak to you and really touch your heart and cause you to be willing to stand up for the gospel. And I pray that God will just bless you. And remember, when you say, well, I don't know everything about prayer, I don't know how to pray and all of that. I can remember saying that. The fact is, I really don't know that anybody can tell you exactly how to create a relationship with any other person. You just have to do that. And it takes time and it takes some effort. And I just pray that you'll create that relationship with God that you need to have, not the relationship with God that somebody else thinks you ought to have. So this morning, God bless you. I pray that you would just be blessed and that you would just be encouraged and lifted up. Jesus is coming. And I tell you what, church, we need to be ready. God bless you all.